The night before I was paralysed, I said to some friends, I'd rather be dead than paralysed. I can't imagine anything worse. In a random conversation, and 12 hours later, I was. And that's definitely not true. And it just takes you on a deep journey of discovery of what it, other levels of being human, which are maybe just a little bit less based in what we do with our body.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
How are you?
Good. You sound very British.
I am, and so do you.
I am.
Where in Britain are you?
Inverness, but right now I'm in Mallorca.
Inverness, which means Inverness in Scotland.
Yeah.
And what are you doing in Mallorca?
I'm here quite a lot in the winter. I started coming here in the winters to train on my handbike, and then just got a little bit addicted to being in a warmer climate and enjoying Spanish life.
Okay, I like it. And what's your name?
Karen Darke.
Karen Darke. I'm assuming you know my name, but if you don't, it's Leon.
I do know your name, but you know what? I don't know much about you either. So this is going to be an interesting half an hour.
Okay, great.
Whatever it is.
Well, there you go. So, Karen, who are you? Who are you, Karen Darke?
Well, there is the ultimate question, isn't it? Who are we? We could get existential on this.
Indeed.
But if we stayed on the planet, on the grounded answer, I have lots of identities, but for a number of years, have been a Paralympic athlete in the sport of hand cycling. I retired last year. At heart, I love to explore and adventure into wild places, but I have to do it in unusual ways because I'm paralysed from the chest down after an accident. And I like to write and speak and coach and work with people in all kinds of different ways. I guess the theme would be around finding more peace inside oneself, but particularly in relation to, overcoming challenges, navigating life change, etc. Is that a decent summary?
It is indeed. It is indeed. I mean, how did you take such a devastating event and turn it into something positive, seemingly very positive?
I suppose I just had a little chat with myself and thought, well, I don't know how many lives I've got, but right now I only know about this one and I need to make it as good as I can. So I can sit around and feel really sorry for myself and really miserable and have a pretty miserable time and probably end up not having very many friends, or crack on with it and make the most out of this new life and focus on what I can do instead of what I can't, and just go out there. And so my first big dream laid in hospital became to cycle across the Himalayas. So that was the dream that the poster stuck on the ceiling that I looked at for about 3 months turned into a reality, but pedaling across the Himalayas on a handbike instead. So it seems like my life is about inventing crazy dreams, then finding all the little ways and equipment and inventing ways of doing it, and then finding some mad people to come and do it, and going off and discovering something and then coming back and sharing it.
That's amazing. I mean, how did you feel when you completed that journey of hand cycling around the Himalayas? You said across, like in what sense? Because the Himalayas are pretty big.
So the first trip I did there was cycling from Kazakhstan, so Central Asia, across into China, and then across the Karakoram down into Pakistan. So, I mean, that was quite a long time ago now. I've been paralysed for 30 years. So that was just like a couple of years after I was paralysed. So it was way back when borders were barely open and countries were not, roads weren't tarmac. The Chinese hadn't put tarmac anywhere at that point in time. So it was pretty rough. But I suppose when we do something we never think we can, it gives us just that little bit more hope and belief that there's more we can do. And so I guess that's what that journey did. It was like a rite of passage in a way, just going, okay, there's lots of other crazy things that are possible then if we can do this. So yeah, it's probably led to defining some of my life purpose really, which I guess is around just helping us all open our minds to realizing how much we limit ourselves with our minds.
And how, I mean, I do that. We all do that, right?
We all do that.
Yeah. Like if someone's listening that is limiting themselves, which is basically everyone is listening, how can they unlimit themselves? How can I unlimit myself?
Well, it's a work in progress. I have to work on it too. But I suppose for me, it's just noticing where my thoughts get stuck or where I'm starting to, block myself, maybe with some beliefs that I have to challenge and think, well, really? Where is that really true? And just start to ask questions. I think questions open up doorways. So as soon as I find myself thinking something that I maybe can't do or feeling like something's too difficult or noticing any kind of limiting narrative in my head, then I get onto it and try and change that narrative and change it to something else. So like the first Paralympic Games I went to, I'd never raced. I'd done 2 races in a handbike. I'd been last in both of them, but so badly last, there wasn't even a finish line anymore. So the thought of getting to go to a Paralympic Games clearly seemed kind of crazy. And my narrative was, but I'm not an athlete. And then I thought, well, I can't go around telling myself that if I'm trying to get to Olympic Games. I need to change it. So I changed it to, let's have an Olympic experiment and see what it takes to try and get to one. And let's just try it and see and experiment. And then you can't really fail if you have an experiment. So I would recommend just start playing around with your thoughts and changing them and asking questions and turning things into little projects and experiments just to see what might happen. And then it's a bit less threatening because you're not saying you're going to do anything or putting yourself up to achieving something that you don't really know whether you can or not.
I get the sense that you've had a lot more adventures than just the Himalayas.
Well, there's been a few.
Tell me some of them. And the lessons that you learnt whilst on them.
So I would define like different kinds of adventures. So lots of my adventures have been what you might call like more of a traditional adventure. So going out, crossing the Greenland ice cap, but in the sit ski and, leaving my wheelchair behind for a month, doing it, not on my own, obviously, with other people. Sea kayaking from Canada to Alaska for 3 months with no wheelchair, sleeping on the beaches. They would be a lot more what I'd call outer adventures. And then I think I get interested in the inner adventure that happens as well. And so there have been times, like when I was first paralyzed, where I'm stuck in a hospital for 6 months, or times when I have injured the skin on my bottom, like a pressure sore, and had to lie on my tummy for 6 weeks in a house. And then it's like, okay, how can I have an adventure on my sofa or in my bed? Like, I think there's kind of different versions of adventures. So there's a bit of an answer. I've not answered you fully, but
no, I mean, you talked about the inner adventure, and I can relate to that because for me, the external adventure is great, but the true adventure is what happens in here.
Absolutely.
And what happens in here, right?
Yep.
Because of that external adventure.
Yep.
And I often tell people, I say to them, part of traveling is not just to experience what you see and what you feel from what you've seen. It is the inner journey that you go on. That's where the change happens.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And so the last, the last number of years, 5 years or so, I've been riding my handbike across different continents, following rivers and coastlines. And people have been coming with me on those journeys that have never done anything like that before. And that's been obviously an adventure for them, but also a massive adventure for me because I see it through fresh eyes. I see things through their eyes because I've been doing adventures for years. And it's like seeing things through the eyes of a child where you just get new perspectives and suddenly feel the excitement for things that you've maybe neutralized yourself to because you've become accustomed to it. And then, of course, that triggers all of that stuff inside of ourselves. Asking, when we see other cultures and experience really different places, we can't help but start to ask more questions about who we are, why we are, how the world is, all that kind of good stuff. And so it takes you deep.
You mentioned that you've been paralyzed for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
This may be a tough question, it may not be, but I'm going to ask it. The moment that you realized that someone said to you, you're going to be paralyzed forever. How do you process something like that?
So your question's deep and profound. The answer is really not, because when I found out, when I woke up out of a coma, I think I was on so many drugs, diamorphine pumped into my system, that it like the shock of it doesn't hit you at that point. So it's almost like a gradual realization. And I think our bodies and our minds are very good at it maybe not being as shocking as you might think, if that makes any sense. So I think in those days before I woke up, my body on a subconscious level will have known what was happening. And it's not, it takes time for things to sink through all the levels of our body, from the physical to the emotional to the energetic, like all those, in that integration of all those parts. So for me, it was kind of a gradual realization, and the initial shock wasn't the initial news wasn't the difficult bit. It wasn't even a shock, probably because of the numbing of various drugs I was on. But I think it's more the gradual realization that actually, yes, this doesn't seem to be going away. Obviously, you kind of have a denial period where you're trying to move your toes and do things and thinking, I can absolutely get through this, and with my mind I'll move my body again. And there are clearly stories of people who successfully do that. But I would say every injury is different. And I have certainly done a huge amount of that belief and trying to move my body in all sorts of levels. But at some point, the kind of realization that actually nothing's really changing here starts to sink in. And I wouldn't say I've ever not believed that it's not possible to heal a spinal cord in some way. I still believe that the world is magical and we've got way more power than we even have a remote grasp on. But I haven't sussed it out yet. And actually, it also makes you realize that we're not just our body. Like, our body is a vehicle, and it's handy if it moves a lot, but we're so much more than just our physical body. So, yeah. I suppose the night before I was paralyzed, I said to some friends, I'd rather be dead than paralyzed. I can't imagine anything worse, in a random conversation. And 12 hours later, I was. And that's definitely not true. And it just takes you on a deep journey of discovery of what it, other levels of being human, which are maybe just a little bit less based in what we do with our body.
So clearly you're a spiritual lady. You have based on what you just said, and your the essence that I feel from you, and being in the situation that you've been in for the past 30 years, you must have experienced things on a spiritual plane that most of us don't experience. Like your senses are more focused. Does that kind of make sense? Like, I've read books about people who have kind of been in bed for, like, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and their senses, other senses, get far more
attuned
focused.
or something.
Yes.
I don't know the answer, because we only know what we know, don't we? So I don't know what it's like to be anybody else, or what I'd be like if I wasn't paralyzed. So I don't know how to answer that question, but I've definitely had a journey. I had various experiences in life which have made, taken me into believing that there's way more to this life than we see. Like quite a long time ago, I read a book by a Japanese journalist, which was all about, it was called In Search of Brazil's Quantum Surgeon. And it took me into the world of kind of the quantum world. And I ended up going to Brazil and being chopped open by a spirit surgeon with a rusty knife and no blood and all sorts of kind of crazy stuff with physical stitches in my body. And then coming back to Scotland and trying to explain to my GP why I needed stitches taken out of my back when there was no record of any known surgery. So I've kind of ventured into that world of the ethereal and the not well understood, or maybe we're gradually starting to understand it more.
And can you explain that experience, that living in that ethereal world?
I mean, I'm a scientist by background, so my mind is constantly logical and looking for reasons and deducing what's happened and kind of analyzing. So I spent a lot of time doing that after I came back from that experience in Brazil. But I couldn't get it. I couldn't give any logical explanation for it. I wasn't hypnotized. There was no nothing. Nothing in. I didn't consume anything, take anything. I didn't pay any money. There was no reason why there was any sort of thing related to this that was any sort of imaginary or made up, or for me it was a real experience which completely shattered my paradigm of what's possible in this world. At that point in time, I didn't think it was possible to be chopped open with a knife and not feel pain. I didn't think, all of the stuff that went with it didn't stack up in my world. And I suppose what I realized is that in different parts of the world and in different sectors within different parts of the world, there's so many different belief systems about what's possible and what's not. And it just blew me out of the water into a whole other realization of how we grow up in the cultures that we grow up in, or the social norms that we grow up in. And actually, there's other places in the world where those things are just so different. They're wildly different from what we might know. So that I suppose it made me just go, I know nothing. I'm open-minded. I really believe anything's possible. And I didn't come away from that experience walking. But I suppose in many ways, I feel like I came away from it just not feeling limited by the fact that I can't, just realizing that we really can do pretty much anything.
I love it. I love it. Tell me, how can...
I love that. I love the concept of your podcast, by the way, that you know nothing and we have no idea where we're going to go. So it's interesting.
Who knows?
Kombucha, by the way, my favorite drink.
Oh, beautiful. How can someone that has no understanding of, I'm calling it the ethereal world or the spiritual world or whatever you want to call it, how can someone who spent their lives in a box, in the society's box, in like everything is black and white box, how can they dip their toes into another world?
I think probably most people are doing these days. Like in the 30 years I've been paralyzed, I think the kind of baseline shift is massive. Like I don't remember anyone doing meditation or yoga or mindfulness or anything like that 30 years ago. So whether it's just the circles I move in have changed or whether society's changing generally, but I think most people have experienced something that's slightly unexplainable, whether that's a funny sensation or seeing a ghost or having some experience where someone's done a reading for them or feeling something weird if they've done some meditation. Or for me it even comes down to if we're at a concert or a place where there's some incredible musical magical thing happening on a big scale, we feel it in our body, don't we? We feel something that's a little bit hard to define. So I don't have the answers. I don't know about the world we can't see. I don't see things particularly, but I'm just aware that, there's a lot more going on than most of us on this planet can actually sense and see in the way we've been taught to. At least we have to almost train or tune in to feeling something a bit different.
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily about seeing it with your eyes, right?
Yeah.
It's about feeling it. It's like there's an energy that you feel. You can't see it, but you feel it.
I'd say you can kind of, sometimes I feel I can kind of see it, but it's not seeing with my eyes. It's like seeing with my imagination. And when I was younger, I just used to dismiss that and not really think of it as anything. And now I'm starting to realize that sense that we have sometimes. For example, today I was riding my handbike. I was out for about 3.5 hours and I had a sore shoulder and I started kind of seeing spirals coming out of this shoulder. And then I'm like, am I just imagining this? Is this just something I've learned along the way that I'm imagining it's good to have that happening? And then I'm like, well, no one's ever taught me that. And I don't know why I would imagine that. That's quite interesting. And I've had that happen before where I kind of almost in my imagination see things. And I don't know how to explain it, whether it is something that's totally made up, or whether it's something that's actually really real and tuned into something that is on another plane or something.
It's definitely on another plane. And I sometimes look back at history to realize that they thought they knew everything, but they didn't. It's exactly the same with us. We think we know everything, but we do not, because the people that come after us in 100 years and 200 years and 300 years are going to look back at us and be like, you didn't know that there were spirals coming out of your arm, right?
To be honest, I suspect looking back in history, there are probably civilizations who knew a heck of a lot more than we did right now. I was not long ago at Chichen Itza in Mexico, one of the 7 new wonders of the world, the pyramids, and you just look at that and you're like, absolutely incredible. Maybe they knew something we really didn't to be able to build that.
So do you do motivational speeches?
I do get asked to do that, yeah. I don't tend to call it motivational speeches because I don't know whether it's motivating or not. In fact, I think sometimes it's very demotivating for people because they look at all the things I've done and think I've lived about 10 lifetimes in one, and then they just feel like they've done nothing and go away feeling a bit depressed. So that's not the intention I would like to have. So I don't profess to motivate anybody, but I share stories and get people thinking and hopefully, just get people entering a world that we don't always have time or space to enter into in our day-to-day busyness.
So I know we don't have too much time. So I'm going to leave you with one last question.
Mm-hmm.
You said that people get depressed when they leave your speech. I'm sure that's not true. So what is the main lesson that people leave, or that you want people to leave after they've listened to your speech?
Oh my goodness! You know what? I don't want to answer that question because I think everyone that listens is in a different place in their life. So everyone will go away with something a little different. If I look at feedback that tends to come, I think people get inspired to think differently about how they might navigate things in their life that are feeling difficult, or reset their mindset so that they can see things through a new frame that's more positive, and maybe just uplift that baseline state of being to a happier level somehow.
But that's a beautiful thing. If you can, I know you don't want to really answer this, but I'll tell you that if they leave your speech thinking that's a hopeful thing. They're like,
absolutely. I joke saying people leave depressed. I don't think they do, and I really hope they don't. But I am aware that sometimes I have crammed quite a lot in, so it seems to just. I think the impact is that people go, okay, actually, I could be doing more than I'm doing, and I could get out of this comfort zone that I've been in. Most people, we're wired, aren't we, just to be comfortable. I seem to be not wired like that. I seem to be wired to seek being uncomfortable. And I've never set out to do that. It just seems to be how I am. Like I recently came back from a little mini expedition to Norway, sit skiing across some of the Arctic plateau there and camping in -30, and we're preparing for a trip to Antarctica. And the main question people have asked me is, why? Why would you do that? Why would you want to sleep in a tent at -30? And I'm like, yeah, I ask myself the same question when I'm laid there and I'm absolutely freezing and it feels a little bit miserable. But actually, when you wake up in the morning and you open the door in that tent and you see the sun rise over this incredible Arctic plateau and the ice crystals are shining at you, it's like, wow, it's worth it for that. So I think getting out of our comfort zone also takes us into a world which is incredibly colourful and special, but it's really easily just to stay in that comfortable, slightly grey zone. And I like to go and seek the colours.
And I would go so far as to say that when you're in that tent in Norway, apart from when you're upset and depressed, because I get it, but ultimately you're feeling fully alive. When you see that sunrise, when you see that ice, you're fully there.
Of course.
And most people never have that. And they don't know what it's like to experience it. So they're like, why are you? Because sometimes to experience it, you have to go out to do crazy things, right? Not all the time. Yeah. You can wake up in the morning and look outside and see the sunrise and be like, oh my God, I'm feeling fully alive. But in that moment in Norway, I would go so far as to say that you feel fully 100% alive and connected to everything.
Yep. And I guess that's why I like to adventure so much. But most people don't get it. And I think when you come back from places like that, you appreciate the luxuries and the comforts that we have so much more as well, especially when you've been through a place where, you know, there really isn't luxury and comfort, where people are living in mud huts and shacks by the roadside. And I see people in the world that live in those conditions, and actually I see much bigger smiles on their faces than in the comfortable world, in inverted commas.
Agreed. I want to leave you with one thing. Have you ever seen the movie Shawshank Redemption?
I have, but not for a while. And my long-term memory is terrible, but I have seen it.
So there's a famous scene where Morgan Freeman is speaking to Andy Dufresne. I can't remember the actor's name. And he says to him, hope is a dangerous thing. And I'm here to tell you, as you have just told me and everyone else that's listening, that hope is not a dangerous thing. It is a beautiful thing.
I would say hope is everything.
Absolutely. So thank you so very, very much for coming.
Thank you. Very enjoyable 25 minutes. Thanks.
No worries.
Hello everyone, it's Leon here, aka the Kindness Guy. If you like my videos, which I hope you do, don't forget to press the subscribe button and also to ring the little bell so that the notifications notify you that I have a